theyeshiva.net.
What was the main point we learned about last shir? That the neshama goes through the whole journey on earth and under the earth, so to speak, in order to become a be'er mayim chaya. And the Balatanya said, never confuse the journey with the destination. Never define the journey as your essential state. Sometimes a person goes through things, but those things don't constitute your essence. You have to know what is the journey and who you are. Because if a person doesn't know that, so then they sometimes take on properties of the journey that becomes them, and then they don't already know who they are. And that's always a key. You know, I may be sent somewhere, but I was sent there. That's not me. A person has to be able to understand their own identity. And he said that's why we say every morning, we start off the brachas, Likkutei, neshama shenasata bi tahirihi, ata barasa, ata yitzartan, ata nafachta bi, ata mashamra bekirbi, ata asid litla mimeni. It's not to get morbid and start talking about the opposite of life. It's to understand what the neshama is, and who the neshama is, and the journey of the neshama. And therefore to know never to mistake the means for the ends, the journey for the tachlis, for the ultimate purpose, as he explains at length. And this allows a person, this allows the water to flow through the earth, be filtered through the earth, circulated through the earth, and actually become much more fresh and much more clean and much more crystal clear and much more vibrant and much more hydrating to the person, actually like any other, more than any other source of water. Be'er mayim chayim. That was one of the main points. But like every well, it can be eclipsed, it can be covered up by earth, by soil, by dust, by gravel, by rocks and pebbles, and therefore you have the chafarua and you have the karua. You need the chfira, you need the kriya. He describes the difference of the two words. In order to explore and find the source of water, find the mayim chayim, but it's never a question that the mayim chayim is there. The only question is how much I have to dig. Never doubt. It's not like when you're digging physically, there may be water here, there may not be water here. And the truth is, if you dig deep enough, you probably find water. But the mayim chayim here is always there. It's not. It's never a source that can be dried up. But you need the chafarua and you need the karua. And he says, who digs it? Be'er chafarua sarim. That's this language of the shira. What's sarim? So sarim is, he said, Avraham, Yitzchak, and Yaakov, who are the sarim, the founding fathers, so to speak, the leaders of the progenitors of the Jewish people, especially Yaakov, who Chazal say was Bachur Shaba'avas, the chosen one, including both Avraham and Yitzchak. And his name was, Yaakov's name was Yisrael, Ki Sarisa im Elokim v'im v'tuchal. When he was given the name, the adversary told him, because you wrestled with Elokim and with people, and v'tuchal, and you prevailed. And he explains at length what that means. Ki Sarisa im Elokim represents, it's a remes for the wrestling with the tzimtzum, with the concealment, going to the space of Achdus Hashem, and in Anoshim is Malachim. In Chumash, often Anoshim, like by Avram Avinu, Vayar V'ine, Shloisha Anoshim. And he explained, what does it mean to wrestle with Malachim? The Malachim are all one-dimensional. A Malach can't do more than one shlichus. Yeah. Why? Because the Malach represents a keli for a certain flow, for a certain ashpah. And if this keli is filled, this is my identity. The uniqueness of Yaakov Avinu, and Hashem is Torah. And Torah, he says, is the Torah includes everything. So therefore, Yaakov is Sarisim Anoshim. Anoshim, if I'm this, I'm not this. The Torah can include paradoxes. Achas dibir elikim, shtayim zu shamati. When Moshe hits the rock, kipatish, yefoitz it selach. Chazal say, it's one rock, but it's splintered into many pieces. It's one fire, but it's splintered, so to speak, into many sparks, and it's all one fire. Achas dibir elikim, even though shtayim zu shamati. So it comes out in two opposite experiences, but it's really a nakuda of achas. That ability to create oneness from diversity, to be able to synthesize paradoxes, to be able to not get splintered and fragmented. Like the Malach says, I'm this, I'm not this. That's the uniqueness of the Adam. And that's why the person is anything but monolithic. The person is anything but uniform. The person is anything but in one dimension constantly. Yeah, I don't know such people. Maybe there's a few people like that. They're always in the same state. There's a beautiful word from the Mezritcher Magid. It's a hafla de kevort. The Gemara says in Shabbos, Meseches Shabbos, Daf Lamed Aleph, it's a very famous story, that a non-Jew came to Shammai, right? And he asked him to teach him the whole Torah on one foot. So, Dochafoy ba'amas habinyan. Shammai apparently was involved with real estate, like all good Jews. Yeah, why was he? Somehow he had an amas habinyan. I don't know. The Gemara doesn't say that he was involved. I'm just saying he had an amas habinyan. Amas is a stick that was used for measuring what? Meets and bounds, yeah. Which was used for binyan, for structure, for construction. So he had the amasa binyan, dochafoy, boom, arais, with the stick, arais von shul. So he came to Hillel, and Hillel told him, I'll do it. What you dislike to be done to you, don't do to your friend. That's the whole Torah. Everything else is commentary. Go learn the commentary. And he became a convert. So the Maggid asks the famous question, why did Hillel have to throw him out of shul? Shammai, sorry. Yeah. Obviously, he felt that the guy wasn't ready, teach me the whole Torah on one leg, Yeshikoyach, Go into a medical school and say, teach me everything that's available in medicine in 20 seconds. Thank you. You're not a serious student. How long could you stand on one leg? For a minute, for 20 seconds. If you're an athlete, for a longer time, you're going to learn the whole Torah. What the Gemara is medayek dochfoy ba'amas habinyan. He pushed him away with a stick and a stick of binyan. So you could say, well, that's what happened. But if Chazal chose that detail, it wasn't how he pushed him. What if he pushed him away with his hands? What if he sent the Gabbai to throw him out? Kaminig. As the minig is. He didn't throw him out himself. Ain't shliach ledvar aveda. And what do you have to throw somebody out? You could be nice. Yeah. The Shammai says in Pirkei Avos, Perik Aleph, Shammai ve'avei mekabel, as kol ha'adam b'seiv upon him yafis. Kol ha'adam actually means every person. So tell him you're not ready. So the Maggid of Mezritch says, there's a deeper interpretation here. The person wanted to convert, but he said he wanted to be al regel achas. He wants to always remain on the same foot. He always wants to remain on the same foundation. A regel, a foot, holds up a table. He wants achas. Achas doesn't only mean one. Achas also means uniform, the same. It's the same. So he says he always wants to remain. Now he's inspired, he's uplifted, he's infused, he's enthusiastic. He always wants to remain on that regel. As they say in English, on the right foot. He wants to always remain standing on one regel, the same foundation. It should be day in and day out. He asked Shammai, what's the eitzah? That once your heart gets on fire, it stays on fire. Right? It's like a husband will come and say, what's the eitzah? I'm having a good day in my marriage. How do I sustain the same mood forever? How do you freeze Kodak moments? Kodak moments, alayhim hashalom. Yeah, because it doesn't exist. Kodak moments, boom, freeze it, azayizas. So for a picture, it can work. That's his shaila. So Shammai told him, dochafoy ba'amas habinyan. The whole binyan of Bria Sa'olam doesn't work this way. Vayi erev, vayi ivoy k'yom echad, vayi erev, vayi ivoy k'yom sheni. There's night and there's day. There's sunset and sunrise. You think you're going to be the only one that's not part of the binyan? Dachafay b'amas habinyan is not just physical. That itself is the shear. He said, amas habinyan, the structure of creation has a measuring stick. It has a system. There's a rhythm. There's a beat to the universe that the Rebbeinu Shalom made. There's a beat. There's aliyahs and there's yeridus. There's night and there's day. There's moments we're up, there's moments we're sleep. You think you're the only one who's going to be out of that? It doesn't work that way. Al-regelachas can't be al-regelachas. We fluctuate. So he came to Hillel. Hillel, the Maggid says this, Hillel didn't argue with Shammai. Hillel was mazbeh. Hillel explained Haguf Akasha. So he says Hillel was being mazbeh Shammai. Shammai said the Nekuda, and Hillel explained. Hillel made it palpable. What did Hillel say? What you dislike to be done to you, don't do to somebody else. Which means as follows. Hafla the Kavod from the Maggid. He says, how did you become a ger suddenly? Why are you coming into the Beis Medrash? You have nothing better to do than become a Jew? Right? Like the Gemara says in Yevamis, those who learn Yevamis, when a ger comes, you tell them, we're dvuyim and schufim. It's not the wisest thing to become a Jew. You start dealing with anti-Semitism. Was darfst? Be a good guy. You'll get your elam haba. Chsidim esolam. Yeshlam chel elam haba. We have nothing against non-Jews. The only religion that doesn't say that there's no salvation outside of Judaism is Judaism, right? Other religions, there's no salvation outside of this, outside of that, outside of that. Chazal say it's a Tosefta, and the Rambam Paskins Laloch and Hilchos Malachim. Chasidei umas ha'olam. Yeshlam chelik elam haba. Right? Beautiful elam haba. There's a Makubal Avodas HaKodesh of Meir ben Gaba. He says they're even going to have Tchiyas HaMesim. It's fascinating. Even Tchiyas HaMesim, Ad Kedei Kach. Sefer Avodas HaKodesh, it's a very prominent sefer in Kabbalah. It was written in the 1400s. Reb Meir ben Gaba was one of the big Mekubalim in Spain. I saw it myself in Sefer Avodas HaKodesh. So the pshat is, why did you suddenly become a ger? What happened? The Chidah writes, always in Gemara, there's an expression, Katan shenis gadol. A minor who became an adult, Evet shenishtachrer, a slave who was emancipated. You would expect Goy shenisgayer, a Goy who converted, never. Throughout Shas, it's always Ger shenisgayer. So the Chidah picks up on it, and the Chidah says he was a Ger before he was nisgayer. There was a nitzutz. Why would somebody be driven to convert for authentic reasons? Why? What's this thing I want to become? Why? What do you need it for? Elamai, it's who you are. You'll ask a question. Why am I? This is who I am. Gershon is Gayed. He was a ger before, but the nitzutz was very concealed. It was dormant. It takes 20 years, 30 years, 40 years, 50 years. You sometimes meet people in the world, converts. It's a pelish of aployim. They were surrounded by goyishkeit on every level. Everything was as good and normal and predictable. And suddenly, out of nowhere, they had to make this whole ruckus. Why? A gitakash, Gershon is guy. It's a gay, he's a gay before. So the Maggid asks this person, was is plutzling Hashem? What happened to you? You were alive 30 years, 40 years, we don't know the age, whatever the age was, without being a Jew. Why suddenly do you come into the Beis Medrash to start asking questions you want to learn Torah? The answer is, there was another Jew who had a nefillah. There was another Jew who had a difficult moment, and he fell down spiritually and emotionally. He fell into the abyss. And as he falls into the abyss, he picked himself up. And when he picked himself up, he attracted all the nitzutzes that were in the abyss, including yours. So your nitzutz was triggered. Because when you go down to a very low place, people who are low can relate to you. If you stay in an ivory tower, you can't relate to these people. Atziyah sha'oil, you have to go sometimes down, very low. The Baal Shem Tov said, the Gemara Mishnah says in Rishon, Shliach Tzibur, she'enei moitzei, she'enei mechuyev bedavar, enei moitzi es harab m'yedei chivase. Shliach Tzibur, who's not obligated to do a mitzvah, can't fulfill the mitzvah for others, like reading the Megillah, or blowing shofar, right, or benching. I have to be mechuyev. So the Baal Shem Tov said, mechuyev also means guilty. Mechuyev as in yatsa chayav. Chayav in Gemara is often used for guilt. You're chayiv, not just obligated. You're chayiv. Yotzach mechuyev bedina. Shliach tzibur she'enei mechuyev bedavar. Shliach tzibur who's not mechuyev, he's not guilty. In other words, he's not connected to the challenge. Einoi moitzias harabim yedei chayvasam. He can't take out the people from their chayv, from their guilt. A lifeguard can't save the person by saying, hey, come out of the water, you batlin. He can't save somebody that way. He has to jump in. When you jump in, it could be dangerous if you don't know what you're doing. But that's the only way you could schlep him out. You have to get, as they call it, down and dirty. It's not so easy for people. I want to remain on the top of my tower, and I'll take a megaphone and I say, hey, come here, come to me. But the famous story with Reb Nachman, everybody knows, right? With the chicken under the table, huh? You know the mice, huh? The prince who decided that he was a rooster, and he sat under the table. And everybody tried every medication. And then the Chacham went down under the table. He said, chicken. Because then there's kinship, there's empathy. Without empathy, there's no connection. Without connection, I can't get you out. So the Maggid tells this person, How did you get out? You want to be inspired forever. Yeah. How did you get to that space? Because somebody else wasn't inspired. Because somebody else had a spiritual nefillah. And in that nefillah, they lifted you up. Madalach sani l'chavrach loisavet. You now want to do the opposite for everybody else. What you would dislike to be done to you, you don't want nobody else should have ever had a difficult moment, because then you would have remained in the abyss. It's because somebody else went downward that you came up. It's like a seesaw. Mamash a seesaw, right? I go down and you come up. Somebody went down for you to go up. So now you never want to go down again. That's what the Maggid told. It can't be al regelachas. So that's the word here. A malach doesn't have this problem. A malach is one-dimensional. A person is filled with paradoxes. There's an aliyah, there's a yerida, but it's always a journey. And that was the chiddush of Moshe Rabbeinu, to be megala, that all the sparks are connected to the nekudas ha'achdus. Like the Alter Rebbe said in Torah, one dibur, one pasuk is koilel kol Torah kula. How can it be koilel kol Torah kula when Torah is manifested in endless different psukim and halachas? Because in nekudas ha'achdus, it encompasses all of the diversity. It's just manifested in different ways, but at its core, it's one. Achas dibur elikim, shtayim zu shamati. That's why the Sarim are the one who are chayfer, this be'er mayim chayim, of Nasan Meimov. That Shnei Alav, Hashem told him, Shoner Alav, Perek Echad. Teach the Perek of Achdus. Yeah, that was the main nekuda. It's clear, you understand this word from the Maggid. The Hoiben Avart. When you're in a downer, you don't have to get down, because somebody else will be uplifted. You could also see it practically. There's nothing that makes people close to other people as when they can share their moments of yirida, right? Somebody left me a message on Friday. So he lives in Monroe. He lives in Kiryas Yisrael in Monroe, and he watched the event on Thursday night. So he left me a message. He's a social worker, a therapist, I'm not sure exactly. I don't know what, he's involved with people. And he says the most inspiring thing is that you said, I didn't remember I said it, but you said that you have self-doubt sometimes. He says, imagine somebody getting up and saying, I have self-doubt. He says, nobody says that. Everybody says, I know exactly what to do. I didn't know what the big chiddush in that was. But he says, wow. So I understood when in every situation, yeah, it's true in a marriage, it's true in a friendship. When you share with somebody, there was a Yid, Reb Mendel Futterfass. So Mendel Futterfass, he always had very geschmack meises. He was an old Chabad chassid from Russia. He was in Siberia for many years. So he once shared a story that there was a chassid in Poland, and he was going to his Rebbe. And he was a very poor man, so he was walking with his tarba, with his sack. And he was exhausted, and suddenly he sees a Jew, very wealthy, an aristocrat, going in a very fancy coach. The man stops and says, Rabbi Yid, wo geht where are you going? So he says, he's going to this and this city, to this Rebbe. He says, ich gehe dort noch. That's where I'm going as well. So he says, come auf. He had a couch on the coach, a comfortable couch. The Balagola, the wagoneer, was whipping the horses. The horses were going fast, and he was sitting near this wealthy Jew. The wealthy Jew says, I'm a doctor. I'm a doctor, and I'm very well-to-do, and I'm happy to do you this favor. And he thanks him. He says, I want you to know that I'm not just a doctor. I'm a doctor that I go to the patients' houses, and I sit with them, and I see what they need. I don't make them schlep to me. I come to them. And this old chassid who had rags, he was like very poor, and he says, Ich tu euch hazai, I do the same thing. Okay, interesting. He says, and by the way, I am a doctor. If somebody doesn't have money, I do it for free. I do everything. I treat them, I help them, I give them the remedies, I prescribe medicines for them, vitamins for them for free. The chassid says, Ich tu euch hazai. I also do this. He says, you should also know that if there's an almon, if there's a widow or a yasim, an orphan, I take even more care of them. I spend more time with them. He says, Ich tu euch hazai. I also do this. He says, you should also know, I don't only give 10% for tzedakah, I give 20% for tzedakah. Chaimish. He says, ich tu euch also. I also do it. So finally, the whole journey, he says, was tust du so? Du bist ein Mann, ein Battler, ein Schlamazel, was tust du? What do you do? He says, ich tu euch also. Ich sage nur die Sachen, was einen Schein wegen mir. I do exactly the same thing. I only talk about the good things that I do. Ich tu euch also. I do exactly the same thing. Ich sage nur die Sachen, was einen gut. A whole trip he's saying all the good things. He says, "Lass mir henne wegen der andere Sache, what du tust." Right? So that's really where real bonding happens. Where does real bonding happen? If I come and I sit to you and I tell you how beautiful I am, how wonderful I am, how perfect I am, it's all nice, beseder. That's not where you touch somebody, right? We touch people from our weaknesses. That's where you touch people. So it's in that space, that's what the Maggid is saying, that you could lift somebody up. So you're not going to be vulnerable, you're going to be this perfect ger who never has a down moment. So that's the kisarisim elkim ve'manoshim. The malach is one-dimensional. A malach has one shlichus. A person, the shlichus changes constantly. And because it changes constantly, the journey changes constantly. And because the journey changes constantly, person goes into very different and paradoxical moments and can reveal the achdus. Michamcha ki Yisrael, goy echad ba'aretz. Like the Balatanya often teaches, to reveal the achdus in the eretz. So now we go to the next step in Peda Gimel. V'hinei min ha'be'er hazoi sayidei chvirezu nasa gilu b'chinas mayim chayim. So after this long beer, in who digs up the be'er, the sarim, he says, and when you dig up this be'er, biyot, like we said in the beginning, biyot cha'af kidruchi, it's the neshama, it's the gili ha-neshama. So you have the mayim chayim. When a neshama is revealed in a person, everything is in a different place. In other words, every person has a neshama. Every person is a chelik elokah. The question is, which level of consciousness am I operating on? Right? In Tanya, and Bechlal in Sifrei Chassidus a lot, Sifrei Kabbalah, there's this concept of two souls. We have more than one soul. You don't have one brain. You have different brains. The idea that you have one brain, what they call a mono brain, you have one brain and that's it, is a very problematic idea. Because basically it means that everything comes from one brain, and this brain is doing very crazy things and weird things, and you have to shut down parts of it. When a person understands, you have different brains, different souls, and each one has different voices and different situations. That's the paradoxes. That's the paradoxes that a person has. The question is, which level of consciousness am I operating on? I could be operating on one level of, could be operating on another level of consciousness. Today, even in neuroscience, we spoke many times, there's different levels of the brain. You could be thinking with your reptilian brain, which means you're not thinking much. You could be thinking with your mammalian brain, which means you're thinking like a rat. I don't mean a rat in an evil way. A rat like a mouse, or an elephant, a chimpanzee. You could be thinking with your prefrontal lobes, which is more of a person, a nefesh hasichel. You can also be thinking with your nefesh elokis. It's different states. It's always there. The question is what's available to me. Sometimes a person, you don't have wires. You can have a beautiful machine in your house, but you don't have a wire for it. So what happens? You have a computer, you have a phone, but you don't have a wire for it. So what happens? It doesn't function. Why? It's dead. But it's not really dead. You just need to energize it. So sometimes a person has it, but I have no wire to connect to. And you could see sometimes as a person, a part of the brain, neuroscientists have an expression, they say, part of the brain is offline. Offline. What's that? It's offline. Sometimes there's no internet connection. Yeah? It's not that there's no internet. I don't have a way to connect. Maybe I don't have the password. What's my password? So you have it in a person. You have it, but the wire has been cut. And there's a reason the wire has been cut. It could have happened because of a physical event, or because of another event, or because of something internal or external. So what I need to do is not create it from new. I have to wire it. I have to connect to it. I have to become aware that I have this part in me and I could use it. Sometimes a person could live half their life without knowing that they have this part in them. So it's never about getting upset at my weird brain that one day it's inspired and the next day it's mishuga. No. It's two different brains. It's two different souls. There's a lot going on. And I have to work with each one to be able to be at Megala. So that's called Gilui HaBe'er. That's why it's such an important idea to dig up the be'er. What does it mean, dig up the be'er? You're supposed to sit with shovels? Yeah. Here the shovel doesn't mean a physical shovel and go into your brain and start banging your brain to figure it out. That's not how you're going to do it. Take a hammer and start pounding your brain. It's probably not a good idea. I mean, to discuss it with your doctor before you do it. Can also give a few migraines. But the point is, in a way, it's much deeper. It's having the courage to open yourself up to all the parts of yourself which you may not know about, right? If I'm used to responding to life from a particular perspective, that's my go-to place. That's my coping mechanism. I don't know that I have another availability. They use the example, it's Parshas how Hashem made the brain. It's called neural pathways. There's pathways that the brain creates through which it operates, through which it thinks. So imagine you go to work every day in the morning, and there's a certain highway you take, wherever it is, your exit, your New Jersey office, there's a certain highway. Every day you take exactly the same highway. You're doing it for 40 years. One day the highway is blocked. So what do? You're stuck in traffic. The best favor somebody can do for you is tell you there's another highway. No, there's no other highway. You're so used to this highway, there's no other highway. So in cars, it's not so hard. But in your brain, it's a lot harder, because if these are my neural pathways, right? When my wife says these words, boom, this is the highway. Your child says these words, this is the highway. Your employer, your employee, your shutef, your shvige, your shver, your father, your mother, your brother, your sister, whoever it is, says these comments, my car is on the highway, it's 120 miles per hour. There's another highway. Another highway means being megala be'er. It means you have to reveal there's a new well. There's a different source of life. There's a different source of inspiration. There's a lot of cover-ups, a lot of earth, MS. So I have to work through the earth. But don't think that there's no be'er mayim chayim. There's a be'er mayim chayim. That's the avodah. Now I need the tools. You need the tools to be able to do that. Not everybody can do it on their own. You need a support system. You need tools. But that is the ability, that is the tachlis to be able to be at megala. Is it klar? Alles is klar? The Olam here understands? Ah? The Chassidim verstehen? Good. Say, füllen euch, oder me versteht not? We're vulnerable. Madalach sani lechavrach loy savid. It's not so much examining your deeds, it's much deeper than that. Because I can examine my deeds from the same point of view that I examined my deeds last year. You understand? That's one of the biggest challenges that people have. They try to do improvement, but they're using the same tools that they always had. So their improvement is very, very limited, because what they need is a complete... the definition of insanity, right? I'm using the same tools, and I'm expecting different results. You understand? The person means well. The person means well. They're not conscious. It's not a person's fault. It's not. You have to have a lot of courage. Growth comes through a lot of courage. A lot of courage. The younger man, he was having terrible shalom bayis problems. What happened? Anger management. He would explode on his wife and his kids. Now I knew him. He's a nice person. He felt there's an expression in Shevet Mutter, Shayim Aleim Charatas. He would regret it immediately, and he would apologize. But the next day it happened again, and then again, and then again, and again. So he went to somebody, and the person says, "You're not learning enough. You have to learn more," which is a beautiful, beautiful thing, to learn more. And then another person gave him another answer, to read this, to read that, to read that. Nothing was helping. His problem was not learning. He had all the information. He didn't have a problem with information. He knew he would regret it. It's not like he had to be learned and educated that you don't behave this way. It was very clearly that this person becomes a 2-3-year-old child who's trying to survive. He's being threatened. Information is not going to help him. His information is all processed through trauma. You understand? The cheshbon hanefesh was not what he needed. He needed a completely different idea. He needed to be megala different parts of his brain that he didn't know about. They've been offline probably since he's 4 years old. Only when a person can begin to open themselves up to this can there be real healing in these situations. Sometimes a person just needs information. But bisman hazeh, most people don't need information. And if you don't know, Google knows. So he says, what comes out from the be'er? It comes out mayim chayim. Shu kiyum yoiser mebchinas ava berishpei eish beslavos hatfila idei is beinanus. There's what's called ava ka'esh and ava kamayim. Often love is compared to fire. Right? We say in Hashirim, Rishafeha Rishvei Eish Shalheves Yutke. Your heart is on fire. So he says, but there's something that lasts longer than fire. The fire has to eat up the oil or the logs or the whatever is feeding the flame. So you can have a fire, sometimes you're at a fire and the fire burnt, but in an hour there's nothing left. It's not so easy always to hold up a fire. He says, a kiyum yoiser, the water is self-contained. So he says, a kiyum yoiser, it endures more than the love of rish be'esh b'slavos hatfila. Sometimes a person is on fire, and you want that fire to remain. It doesn't. We all know it, right? Sometimes you're on fire. It's beautiful, it's heartwarming. But the fire gets extinguished and the person feels ich bin ge'erd. He says, that's why you have to have water. You can't only have fire. You need fire. But mayim. And that's the be'er mayim chai. Mayim has a kiyum, he says. More than the ava berish, sometimes the person has his slavos. His slavos means passion, fire, a lahav, a flam fire in Yiddish. Hatfila. Idei is beinanus. She'acher hatfila chayleves vayveres. Aval b'chinas mayim, heimam shachas ava she'ein lahefsek. There's the love of fire and there's the love of water. The love of fire is very passionate, and when fire is burning, it's much more exciting than water. It's electrifying, it's intense. Just like when you have it also between people. You have in a relationship an ava ka'esh and an ava kamayim. The Balatanya says, Koil doidi doifik pischili achoisi rayasi. We once learned a mayim in Parshas Bahar. The Balatanya says, it was on Shabbos, I think, there's a choisi, what's the difference between your wife? Well, Hashem says, you're my sister, you're my wife. Well, what does it mean? You don't usually tell your wife, you're my sister, you're my wife. It's two separate things. You're not supposed to marry your sister. Cain and Hevel was a one-time event. The pshat is, it's two types of love. A husband and a wife are capable of a certain eish, there's a certain fire. It can go both ways, like the Gemara says in Soite, ish v'isha, zachu, right? It's eish, yud, and eish, hey, and together it makes yud, ke. But if they get rid of the Yud Kei, he says, Eish oich la'eish. One fire destroys another fire. Because ish and ish, it's a fire. In other words, husbands and wives is fire. If you bring in Yud Kei, so the fire becomes like a shmaka fire. And if not, it becomes a problematic fire. Somebody asked me the other day, why is it that in America there's 60% divorces? I said, why not? Why not? For people to stay married and to stay in a very loving state, it's a chiddush. It's not. Don't take it for granted. It's not like it happens. It doesn't happen. Fire doesn't burn la'olam v'ad. You light a candle, you come back a week later. Where's the fire? What do you do to maintain the fire? Fires don't just last la'olam v'ad. They have to be fed. They have to be nurtured. If you leave a fire on its own, it's going to be extinguished. People say we had a beautiful vacation for 3 weeks. We went away 3 weeks. It was Gan Eden Mamish, which is also a chiddush. That vacation should be Gan Eden Mamish. Most fights happen on vacation because people don't have what to do with their lives. Maybe unless you're hiking very intensely, so you get exhausted, is very good. But so he comes back and he wants, what happened to it? Why doesn't it last forever? It doesn't last forever because fires don't last. Then there's something called achoisi, my sister. A relationship between siblings. I'm not talking about a crazy dysfunctional family where nobody talks with each other. It's a tragedy. I'm talking about a normal family where there's, basic trust and love. Achoisi, your sister, you're not on fire to your sister. At least let's hope so. It's a stable relationship. You can't get divorced from your sibling. You can get divorced, chas v'shalom, from a spouse. You could get divorced. So it's a difference of ava ka'esh and ava kamayim. There's a mile in each, but the mile in mayim it's a consistent thing. A family. That's the concept of family. Right? They say, what's the definition of home? What's the definition of home? The place that they let you in where nobody else lets you in. Home, they let you in. And the place you don't have to have a reason why you go there. Why you're home? Somebody asks you, why'd you come home? What are you here for? Yeah? This is where I am. There's a certain stability. So he says, in Avodas Hashem, there's a moment of rachoisi, a moment of rayasi. There's ava ka'esh. But then there's a time there's no esh, but there could still be mayim. And that's what he says. Ava shein lafsik. V'zui mailas Avram oiha v'isha chesed schoir of nimshach acharecha kamayim. We say in the tefillas of Geshem. Shmini Atzeres, you start asking for rain. Schoir, remember the father who was drawn after you? Kamayim, like water. What's up, it's like water? Well, we're talking about mayim. And then we're megala in every one something that happened with mayim. And then we come to Moshe Rabbeinu. What do we say about Moshe Rabbeinu? Al haselahach vayetzu mayim. Right? Al haselahach. He struck the rock. You have to understand how that falls into Tefillas Geshem. You're trying to ask Hashem. B'tzidkei choin chashras mayim. He should give us mayim because of Avram, Yitzchak, and Yaakov. Yitzchak stuck out his neck to be slaughtered. And Yaakov was Megala the Be'edis and the Maklas, al Shikasas Hamayim, and then biggest chus ala selahach vayetzu mayim. What's so good about that? So that's what we explained last time what Moshe Rabbeinu was trying to do when he struck the rock. But that's the nekuda that here the vart is the mayim. Schoir ab nimshach acharecha kamayim. The mayim has a stability. Even after davening. Sometimes a person can't have his boinus that's going to bring you fire. But the mayim is the consistency. Ein lahefsek. After the parentheses, he brings the parentheses, that's why it says, Shlach lachmecha al pnei hamayim. Famous expression. Shlach lachmecha al pnei hamayim, he send your bread over the water, which also means, kiberev hayamim timtzeenu, which also means the consistency. Wilt es fragen, ah? Fragt. Good question. Gite kasha. He says, maybe Allah Selahach goes on the first time around, Parshas B'Shalach. How do I know not? Because that was on the Tzur. V'ikisa Batzur. This time in Chukas it's Selah. Two separate words. In Parshas B'Shalach, Hashem said, V'ikisa Batzur. In Parshas Chukas, he says, V'dibartem Ela Selah. V'yaches ha-Selah b'matayu pamam. So it says, Allah Selahach, it's the second time around. They should have said, Allah Tzur hach v'yetzu mayim. That would have been very gishmak. Doesn't say that Allah selahach v'yetzu mayim. Huh? That's a good question. It's two different types of rocks. You're going to learn geology. One day, when you finish with physics, go into geology and you'll see the tzur and selah. That's true. But generally, a tzur is more tough. A selah is rocky on its exterior, but is moist on the interior. A tzur is rocky on the inside and on the outside. It's much more tough, more dry. There's no inner, sometimes rocks inside have some, moist, or at least softness. They're more easier to grind and so forth. I believe that's the difference. The word selah, if you take in Hebrew, the letters are very essential, like we always learn, because the letters are the oisius of Asar Mamoris. They're the oisius of the energy. So the names are very important. If you take the word Selah, so Samach Lamed Ayin. So if you spell out Samach fully, it's Samach Mem Chaf. If you spell out Lamed, it's Lamed Mem Daled. If you spell out Ayin, it's Ayin Yud Nun. The middle letters is Mayim. Samach Lamed Ayin Mem Yud Mem. In other words, deep in the Selah, you're going to find Mayim. And that's the vart, that in the Selah there's mayim. That be'er has mayim. You don't have to worry about it. You have to reveal it. It's a very big difference. If you're sitting in front of somebody and you know that there's mayim. You know there's mayim. It's not a shaila. It's not 90% sure. Imagine I tell you there's a treasure in your garden. There's a treasure. Somebody hid $1 million in your garden. Go dig. You're digging and digging and digging. You can't find it. So if it's 50% is a treasure, after digging for a year, you're going to stop. But if you know for sure that there's money there, so every time you don't find it, what does it mean? You're getting closer. It's a different attitude. That's the key difference. That's why when the Chachmei Hachsidus, the Baal Shem Tov and insisted that in every Jew there's a Be'er Mayim Chaim, they didn't say it's 90%, it's 60%, it's 50%. It's everybody besides me or Ploinei Amani who's a loser. No. It's 1,000%, it's 100%. It's a different attitude. So he says the mayim, that's the schoir avnim shechacharecha kamayim. V'hainu lefi shei mayim chayim shemakablim mechachma shenikra as chayim. It's called mayim chayim, which comes from chachma. We learned about Chachma and Bin in the previous Maim of Koirach Va'avad Halevi, who you remember Moichin the Abba, Moichin the Imei, Ratzei Shoif. This is a Hemshech. So Mayim Chaim calls it Ki HaChachma Techaya. Shlomo Melech says in Mishlei, HaChachma Techaya Ba'aleha. Chachma gives life to its master, which al pi pnimius means that Chachma is the source of life. Kulam b'Chachma sisa. B'er pnei melech Chaim. Dahainu b'chinas bittul koyach ma. Because Chachma is the embodiment of bittul, and that's always the source of life. Why is bittul the source of life? Because what does bittul mean? Alignment with the source. If not, it wouldn't be the source of life. If you taish bittul as self-destruction, then it's not the source of life. But if you understand that bittul is koyach ma, koyach, the ability to say what? In other words, to connect with a source. So then Chachma is Chayim, HaChachma Techayim, Ba'er Pnei Melech Chayim. When there's Oir of the Pnei Melech, which is Chachma, that's Chayim. So Mayim Chayim is connected to Chachma. Como shekosem makamachel al pasuk ushafte mayim besosin beinyan nisuch hamayim bechag ech shebchinas ava shalom mayla medish beyesh kamashal aben kushu eitzel aviv mamash. In another mimer of Chukas, which after Maim Balatanya says, all year they poured on the Mizbeach wine. Only on Chukas did they pour Nisach HaMayim. And this doesn't even say in Chumash that Stukim didn't believe in Nisach HaMayim. What's the difference? Wine is more associated with conscious simcha. People drink, right? The Gemara says in Erevin, Nichnas Yayin, Yotza Soid. Wine is a joyous drink, we all know. People don't sit out for festivities and say, let's drink water. You drink water, but drink wine. Wine is wine. So he says wine represents ava kirish v'yesh, like a fire. People get excited. Mayim is l'chayra, a much more boring drink. The Mishnah says in brachas that if you're not thirsty when you drink water, you don't even make a bracha, right? Because it's tasteless, it's colorless, and it's scentless, unless you're thirsty. But mayim represents a deeper dveikus. And that's the dveikus that's deeper than fire. And he says it's like when the child is by the father. What does this mean? If you didn't meet somebody for a few years and you meet them, so you scream, you're passionate, like in the airport, you see them from far. Once the child meets his father, they hug, there's no screaming anymore. Why? Now you should scream. Because now it's not screaming, now it's oneness. So the silence of water is not really silent as much as it is complete dveikus. There's no passion, not because there's no passion, but because you're completely one with something. Passion always represents that there's still a gulf and I'm trying to overcome the distance, the barrier. That's what creates noise. And now it's a beautiful thing. It means you're excited, but don't be fooled by silence, because sometimes silence is much, much deeper. Sometimes, you have a person who with different tzaddikim. Some people daven and they screamed and they jumped. It was beautiful. Sometimes you had a person, a tzaddik daven, you didn't see anything. You would think, the person is daydreaming. No. In real dveikus, there's no passion. Not because there's no passion, because you're completely one. He says, when the ben is by the aviv, schreit nicht. Where I grew up, there was an Alte Gabba. He was a Dokshut Sayyid from Poland. His name was Rabbi Yochanan Gordon. He was a very funny guy. So a Chassidish Sayyid came into shul to daven, and he starts screaming, Yaakov. He goes over to me and says, Hast geprüft mit Guttens? Did you try first talking to Hashem nicely? You don't have to scream right away. He was joking. He says, geprüft mit Guttens. Before you holler, be nice. My point is that sometimes his slavos is because I'm distant. So therefore, I'm overcoming the distance. And Mayim, he says, is when the ben is by the father taka. You don't need medafnet shrayin. Now, sometimes I am distant. So the passion is helpful, right? The passion is helpful. But when there's real dveikus, it's the pchin of avakamayim. And that's stable, that's consistent. Because it's not separate. It looks counterintuitive, but that's how it is. And therefore, and this gilu in a person is what learning is about. Immersing in Torah. Torah, it says in Zohar, it's an expression, Torah comes from Chachma. It doesn't only mean Torah is wisdom. It means Torah is an embodiment, it's a reference of Hashem's Chachma. Mayim Chayim. Pchin is bittel. ולכן נמשך ממנה גילוי זה בנפש האדם, בחינס ולא ישחללו, שלא לדחק רגלי השכינה ועושים דברי בפיך. So Torah, when Torah is learned in this state of oneness, it affects in the soul of a person the same point. V'lo yisachalalu. V'lo yisachalalu is a pasuk in Parshas Emer. Don't make a chilul Hashem. V'lo yisachalalu is Shem Kotchi. But the Balatanya always teaches v'lo yisachalalu from the word chalal. We teach sechalalu, don't desecrate. He always teaches sechal from the word chalal. V'lo yisachalalu, don't make believe there's a chalal where the Shechina is not there. That's what chilul Hashem really means. It's not just don't make a chilul Hashem, don't desecrate Hashem's name. Chilul Hashem means something much deeper. Chilul is believing that there's a space that is not fully present with Hashem's infinity of Einoid Mulvada. So v'lo yisachalalu means that in Torah, a person can get closer to this space of v'lo yisachalalu lo litchak raglei hashchina, not to push away, so to speak, the feet of the Shechina. My words I place in your mouth, because real Torah means I'm a conduit for your words. It's not a separate person learning. V'lochein beParshas Kadesh Lishul Chachmei Lo Nemar Lizikadim Beinei Necha Dainu She'ein Hefsek Lo Ha'ava Be'er Mayim Chayim Shenoivim Tamid V'ainu K'vaydei Mashakasav Arkach L'man Tiyeh Torah Hashem Beficha K'ma Shakasav B'Sifri Parshas V'Eschana. Talmud loimer v'hoyu advarim me'ela shemitoich kach atamakedas HaKadosh Baruch Hu. There's 4 parshias of Kriya Shema that we put in the tefillin. Kadesh, v'hoyu kiviyacha, Shema v'hoyim Shemaya. So in Kabbalah it says that Kadesh is Chachma, Kodesh is Chachma, v'hoyu kiviyacha is Bina, Shema v'hoyim Shemaya is Chesed and Gvura, which comes through Das. And that's why tefillin is the hamshacha of Daled Moichin. Chachma, Kadesh, Bina, Vayikaviyacha, and Das, which is Shema, Vayim Shemir, which is Chesed and Gvura. The machloikas of Rashi, Rabbi Tam, and the tefillin is not a machloikas tam about the order of the parshas technically. It's a whole different energy, Rabbi Tam's tefillin, than Rashi's tefillin. Told you once the story with him of Rama Malach and Alter Rebbe. Tefillin Rabbi Tam is Chachma, tefillin of Rashi is Bina. So he says in Parshas Kadesh, when he speaks about the tefillin, he says, L'zikarim beinei necha. Zikarin comes from Chacham, which is Mayim Chayim, which remains consistent. L'mantiyah Torah Hashem beficha, because that's what Torah does. It says in Sifri, it says, V'havtas Hashem alakecha, you should love Hashem. How do you love? How do you love Hashem? So he says, V'hoyu advarim ma'ela, sherneichim etzav chayim alavavecha. That's what Torah is. Mitech kach atamakedas HaKadosh Baruch Hu. Through Torah, you get to know Hashem. You get to recognize Hashem. Yeah, when you love somebody, you have to get to know them. If you don't get to know them, you can't love them. Va'adam yada es chava. Adam had to know chava. Before she had a child, Adam has to know. And knowing is iskashrus. If you don't know somebody, you have to spend time getting to know the person. It's very hard for people, because people can be married for many years, but you don't really know your spouse. You know the person you would like to think you know. Or you know the person you would want her to be that person in your own imagination. You have to get to know the person. Right? Love is not, I love who you are. I don't love who I think you are. Somebody once said, most people love, they don't love somebody else. They love who they think the other person is. You have a caricature, and that's what I love. That's not love. You love your child, or you love who you think your child is. Once you discover who they are, it's a whole different avodah. So the Sifri says, you have to be makir as HaKadosh Baruch Hu. You have to know them. That's Torah. He says, on a deeper level, what is it? Vaynu lefi ki hachachma she'at Torah b'chinas re'iyah, va'ava nimshach b'chinas re'iyah b'chinas bittul, v'ilamaylem b'chinas ava nimshachas b'chinas shmiyah she'mirachik v'b'chinas rishpayesh. There's love that's called seeing, and there's love that's called hearing. He says, a love that's hearing, which is always from a distance, is eish. And a love of re'iyah that you see is mayim, which is bittul. It's not passion, it's bittul. Because when you see something, you can get lost in it. You know, you get mesmerized by it. It's like you lose your observatory status. Shmiyah is always you remain in your place and you hear the information, you digest it. Re'iyah, they say seeing is believing, or the Gemara says in Rosh Hashanah, Ein Eid Nasa Dayan. A witness can't be a judge, because once you saw it, the objectivity is killed forever. You know, once you saw something, people who have seen certain things, they're in a different place. It's a different place. I was once at a dinner, It was in Chicago. It was before Corona. It was a huge crowd. There was a school, a yeshiva there, had a big dinner. And they asked, I was the guest, the speaker at the dinner. So I finished the speech. I was finishing with a story. So I was telling a story about the Holocaust. I kid you not, somebody gets up in the middle, and I right away saw he's an elderly man, and I right away knew he was a survivor. I could see, you could see. And he says, chutzpah of you to tell a story about the Holocaust. Chutzpah of you. You make the people believe that you know what happened there. Sit down and don't tell the story. He was in Auschwitz. Verstehst? So that's what I did. I said, you're right. And I sat down. What's the difference? There's Re'iyah, there's Shmiya, right? You have it, unfortunately, in terrifying experiences, but you have it in everything. Shmiya, you heard a story. It can affect you, it can impact you, but it's processed by your own identity. Re'iyah, even though Re'iyah is also processed by me, but Re'iyah, it's a different level of intimacy with the story. You saw it, it's different. It's more, the story defines you. In Shmiya, you define the story. So he says, in Avodas Hashem, you have also Shmiya and you have Re'iyah. In Shmiya, you define God. In Re'iyah, God defines you. When you define God, there's passion. When God defines you, there's bittul, there's dvekas. That's mayim, it's not eish. It's a different type of a relationship. And that's consistent because it's not about passion. Sometimes people think if there's no passion, there's no relationship. The Alter Rebbe, sometimes the deepest relationships have no passion, not because you don't feel, because it's beyond feeling. You hear the difference? You have a mother sitting with her child in the hospital, or even in the bedroom, 4 o'clock in the morning, she's exhausted, she hasn't slept, lying, right? If you ask her, are you very passionate? You're feeling a lot of Islavas. I'm not feeling anything. All I could think about is a bed, right? But you take that child away. Oh, she said, she doesn't really care. Yeah, take that child away from her and see what happens. You understand what I'm saying? Don't measure closeness always by how much the fire is burning. It's beautiful when there's a fire. But he says the mayim is much deeper than the esh. Was fragst du? Das darf man gut wissen. It's true, the Mittler Rebbe by davening you saw nothing. They used to say, via ibegebrente hay. On the outside it looks like a coal. On the outside it looks dark. Inside you touch it, you get burnt. I grew up by the Lubavitcher Rebbe. It was a Pella. Rosh Hashanah, Yom Kippur. Could stand at the stender 10, 20 hours and did not move. People go like this, they go like this, they shake. Pasha not move. But it affected you in a way, in an unbelievable way. Once by Ne'ila, he started to break down sobbing, and everyone was like shocked because of the different tzaddikim. They daven in different ways. Sometimes the person is not moving. It's because they're not there in the most powerful way. There's no separateness. So let's finish the Likkutei here. And where does this mayim Chaim come from? Always from the be'er, from below the earth. That's the mitzvahs that are all dressed up in physicality, in earth. You can't be Mekayim a mitzvah without earth. How are you going to put on tefillin if you don't want to deal with physicality? How are you going to give tzedakah? How are you going to do trumas, maisos, Shabbos, Yom Tov, matzah, shofar? Everything is gashmis. Very few mitzvahs that don't need gashmi. All of Torah is an explanation on mitzvahs. Take any Masechta in Shas, Masechta's brachas, is an explanation on the mitzvah of Krishma, the mitzvah of Tefillah, the mitzvah of brachas. Shabbos, explanation on the mitzvah of Shabbos. What is Torah? Torah is a commentary on the mitzvahs. There's nothing in Torah that's not a commentary on the mitzvahs. He's talking about Torah Shabbal Peh. Obviously, you have in Tanakh, you have stories, you have ideas, you have Divrei Agada, but generally, Torah is an explanation on the mitzvahs, which are all earthy. So Torah is the Mayim Chaim that comes from the Eretz. Mayim is again oneness. My words come into your mouth, meaning your mouth is a conduit. It's not separate. It says, the Navi says, when the Mashiach comes, living water will come out of Yerushalayim, half will go to the Yam HaKadmoni on the east. The Mayim Chaim of Torah, which are enclosed in earth, in Gashmis, in the mitzvahs, they will go from the below, and they will fill the Yam HaKadmoni. So the Yam HaKadmoni becomes a recipient from the Mayim Chayim. Like it says, we have it also in Pirkei Avos when two people learn Torah. Oz nidbiru. Yirei Hashem ishal re'eyu vayakshiv Hashem vayishma. When a person speaks to his friend, right? Hashem is listening. Hashem has to listen, me and you learning. You're learning what came from him. Imagine, right? I wrote a sefer, and you were learning with somebody else that sefer. I don't have to listen. I know what I wrote. You're learning what I wrote. So it says Hashem is listening. Vayakshiv Hashem vayishma. Hashem is listening to the two people learning. What does he have to listen? He doesn't know it? It's his Torah. The word HaKadosh Baruch Hu is often described as B'malak, meaning the Shechina that comes into the world. The Torah of Olam Haza. What's mean the Torah of Olam Haza? Torah which is manifested in physicality. These halachas that are all melubash and gashmis, it comes from a tremendous high shayrish, like we learned earlier. Whatever is higher comes down lower. So therefore it accesses Elikus from Soiviv Kalalman, so Vayakshiv Hashem. Vayishma, Mamala Kalam, which is the energy that is limited in the world, is Vayishma, is absorbs, listens to the Eira Torah that comes out through Neshamas down here that are learning Torah that deals with the Inyanim Gashmim. Ad Kedei Kach. Ad Kedei Kach. Be another 5 minutes. I just want to finish the Nukud. V'ayim izeh bezoyeh chelik beis vayakal. V'zeu inyan b'mechoykek b'meshanoisam. The Shira continues. Be'er chafaru asarim. Karua nidivei ha'am. B'mechoykek b'meshanoisam. Mechoykek is with maces. You know, when they have this maces like a stick with a point on the bottom. It was a weapon with which they used to dig. B'meshanoisam, with their staff. That's how they dug out these wells. That's what the Shira reads in Parshas Chukas. So he says, the word b'chukaisai is connected to the word mechaykik, which is chakika, engraving. The word mechaykik is also an engraver of the law, right? Mechaykik mebein raglov. So he says, shnei chakikos lekli al derech mashal mebayis mebechutz. When you engrave a vessel, people who mold vessels, there's two chakikos. There's two engravements, from the inside and from the outside. I don't know if you ever dealt with pottery, or you ever saw a potter, or he makes, for example, klei cheres. You know, you take the earth, you mix it with mud, water, you mix it with some straw, and you have to mold the keli. So there's what you do inside, and what does he do outside? He says, mi b'chutz lahaver kol chaluda. On the outside, you have to remove all the rust. Ubifnim lachik b'beis kibul. On the inside, you have to engrave a cavity, a base kibble. It should be able to receive. If it's going to be a full keli, you can't do anything with it. You want to make a cup, you want to make a bowl, you want to make a pot, you want to make a barrel. You have to create a base kibble. On the outside, you don't need a cavity. On the outside, fakert, you need a wall. But on the outside, you want to remove all the dirt, all the rust. He says, Kach tzarich liyas chikas hanefesh. There's also an avodah to turn your soul into a keli. That's also chakika. And there's two different avodas. There's chikas hakeli mi bachutz, and there's chikas hakeli mi bifnim. It's a very, very profound idea. It's also in communication and teaching. When you want to make a keli, there's two separate avodas. First, you have to work on the outside. If you ever see a potter, he straightens it up. You ever saw pottery? in your journeys. He straightens it up, he makes it smooth, but that's not the keli yet. That's all on the outside, very nice. Now, you have to make a keli mibifnim. You always start with mibachutz. What does this mean? In communication, you see this concept in communication. The first thing is you have to make a person a keli on the outside. The outside is more external. But this is where the Gemara says that Rabbi used to say a milsa de b'dichas first before he used to teach. You make the people ready and open, right? It's the beginning. On the outside, you have to remove the resistance. But that's not yet the keli. Then there's working through the pnim. It's like in your own children. If there's no trust, if there's no kinship, you can't go anywhere. First is chikas aklimi b'chutz. And then there's chikas aklimi b'fnim. So he says... Lahavir kol mibachutz lahavir kol meineo master v'ubchinas chfira. That's chfira. We learned this chfira and kriya. Chfira is removing the heavy clods of earth. Umibifnim liyas bchinas klei kibuloid and seif baruch liyas keli machzuk bracha. That's kriya. Karua. Ve'einoid and seif baruch shayro mizgala ele b'bchinas chachma kayachma. Ein Sof could only dwell with his bittul, with his chachma kayachma. So the mechaykik, the engraver, creates the clay kibul. He allows that the Torah should be accessed in a state of openness, bittul. That's what a keli is. You're open. It's not full. If my keli is full, I can't accept anything. I have to have an empty keli in a good way to be able, not a pusta keli. An empty keli means an open keli to receive, like we learned some time ago. We spoke about, when you're learning Torah as a child, or you're learning Torah as an old person. A child, you're open, you're a clay kibble. So that's the mechaykik. There's always two stages in life. There's chikas aklimi b'chutz and chikas aklimi b'fnim. Chikas aklimi b'chutz is to remove resistance, trust. That's not enough. So now you like me. We're in the same playing fields. But what do I do with that? Now you have to really open up a clay kibble to be able to receive something deeper. And then he says, b'mishanoisam. B'mishanoisam, it says b'mechagrin. They usually translate it as a stick. Really, mishan is a support system, right? Mishenet in Hebrew, to support. Hem tamchi yoraisa. Those are those who support Torah. Tamchin yoraisa. Eitz Chaim hi la machazikim ba. It's a tree of life for those who hold on to it. But machzikim also means those who are machzik, machzikei Torah. They hold on to it, they make it strong, they support it. Ukinyan shenemar b'Yisachar Zvulun, mibnei Yisachar hayu as-Sanhedrin, uZvulun adei shoyosef b'pragmatia b'shvil Yisachar, zacha v'nis'ala b'mayla yosef b'bchinas echad, b'bchina achas. Yisachar and Zvulun had a partnership. Yisachar learned. Zvulun supported Yisachar, but don't think that Zvulun was just a nachschlepper. In some ways, Zvulun became higher than Yisachar. Dahainu b'bchinas mimata l'mayla, mipnei shadei hashpas tuve v'chiyusei, hayi Yisachar oisik b'Torah b'chiyus zeh, hanimshich loi, hadei Zvulun koidem loi shemamshich chayis l'Toraseh. In a way that also means that mimata l'mayla, Zvulun has a mayla. Like we spoke about the Be'er Mayim Chaim. The water comes from above, it goes below, and from the below, it brings up water. Zvulun, who was involved in physicality more than Yisachar, his goodness, his livelihood, his money, supports Yisachar. So Yisachar could only learn with the energy, with the livelihood that he gets from Zvulun. In that sense, Zvulun has something that comes before Yisachar, because he's the one who gives the life that he should be able to learn. The Mayim Chaim, the Chiyus that he should be able to learn. That's why in the Pasuk it says, Smach Zvulun b'tzeisecha, v'Yisachar ba'alecha. It should be first Yisachar, then Zvulun. He says, no, in one Inyan, Zvulun comes before Yisachar. V'lochein nemer b'Zvulun amim har yikro. By Zvulun it says, Moshe Rabbeinu says, the nations will come and call out by the mountain. So Chazal say that all the business people would come, and they were so impressed, they would go to the Bais and see the Beis HaMikdash, and see the uniqueness and the monotheism, one Torah, one God, unlike the Avodah Zarahs. Usually we say, who could go up on Hashem's mountain? Who could stand there? Mi Yalabar Hashem. Nobody can go. It's very hard to climb the mountain. The Chiddush of Zvulun is that even Amim, nations, and it comes from the word umamus. Umamus means Gechalim Umamus are dull coal that have been extinguished. Even somebody in a state of Amim, Umamus, they can also come to the Har. In other words, Zvulun lifts up everybody. Achine, so that's the Mishanoisam. So you have the Be'er Mayim Chayim, which is Torah. B'mechoykek, you need the Klei Kibul, and you have Mishanoisim is the Tam Chidorais. And he finishes, Achine Kol B'chinas Hanal, Shbeb'chinas Me Be'er Me Mata L'mayla, Tzorech Liyis Yisarusa D'Leila L'fnei Yisarusa D'Lasat. Everything that we speak about, you always need an Yisarusa D'Leila, a Yisarus, a Chizik from the Rebbeinu Shalom, before a person's Yisarusa D'Lasat. The Gemara says, Ilmolei HaKadosh Baruch Hu Oizra Ein Yachaloi. Everything needs an arousal from below that Hashem says you're ready for Yisarusa D'Lasat. It's never completely koichi v'yitzim yadi. V'zeu oz Yashir Yisrael. That's why the shira starts off oz Yashir Yisrael. That's when Yisrael sang. Who's Yisrael? Yisrael de Le'ela. Yisrael de Le'ela means Yisrael on their highest level, the source of Knesset Yisrael. They sing out, Ali Be'er. Come up, Be'er. Who is that? He Knesset Yisrael. The Be'er, like he said in the beginning of the Maimon, is Knesset Yisrael Mekar Neshamas Yisrael. The source of all the Neshamas Shekainesses is Vaisefes L'Seichel B'chinas Yisrael de Le'ela, which gathers inside of it the Makar, the spiritual source of Yisrael in divinity. Knesset Yisrael gathers. So Oz Yashir Yisrael, the highest level of Yisrael, sings to Knesset Yisrael, sings to the community of Yisrael. And what does she sing? Enula, Ali Be'er, Enula. Bring up the Be'er, bring up Knesset Yisrael. Enula milmayla lamata. Respond to her from above to below. Liyas Yisarusa de Le'ela shalifnei Yisarusa de L'Sata k'dei liyas Ali Be'er mimata lamayla. In order for the Be'er to be able to lift itself up from the earth, Enula, you first need a response from above. Like Vatan Lehem Miriam. It says Miriam initiated the Shira, right? So he says, Oz Yashir Yisrael. Yisrael de Le'ela sings a song. Ali Be'er, speaking to Knesset Yisrael, lift up Be'er. But in order for that, we need Enula. You have to trigger, you have to arouse the Be'er. You always need Hashem to help and say, we're ready for Yisarusa D'Lasata. Then I can do my work. That's why we say in davening, I'm supposed to do tshuva. What's pshat? You bring us back in tshuva. We say every day, bring us back in tshuva. Or we say in before Krishma, Avar Rachaman, Rachim na aleinu v'sein b'libeinu bina. So do bina. The answer is the hainu lahavin davar mitoich davar. You want to be, of course the person has to do it, but you always need HaKadosh Baruch Hu oizrei hachzirenu b'shuva shleim al-fanach. Open up the door for me. Avinu avarachman v'sein b'libeinu, and then I could take it and go lahavin davar mitoich davar. Go deeper. Ki gam rachmanas hagdoila shaleinu hi rechoike me'asagasenu ve'enonu yicholim la'oiredes harachmanas k'may shehi. As much compassion as you have for yourself, it's never the level of compassion that the Shekhinah has for you, because you don't know your own greatness. You know, Rachmanis is always based on how powerful you are. When you see somebody homeless and you find out that this person, right, a few years ago was a multi-billionaire, it's a bigger Rachmanis than somebody who was born in the gutter. It's a different level. You find out as a prince. What if you find out that this wasn't just a prince, you're talking about the highest of the highest of the highest, the Rachmanis is bigger. So he said, as much Rachmanis you have on your soul, the Rachmanis that Hashem has on your soul is a different level. You'll never experience it because you don't know your own greatness. So Avinu avarachim and rachim na aleinu, that compassion is much deeper. He says we could never trigger that level of Rachmanis because you never know your infinite greatness like that. So therefore, allow me to experience the empathy from your perspective. V'yisarusa d'lasat elazu, hi ayidei hamshachas haTorah, chachma b'rosh v'chachma b'soif. This also comes through Torah. Chachma is b'chutz. You have chachma in the beginning, chachma at the end. Chachma b'rosh b'chinas yisarusa d'leila shalifnei yisarusa d'lasata. V'chachma b'soif shaydei yisarusa d'lasata yisarusa d'leila. You have the chachma in the beginning, which triggers the yisarus, and you have the chachma at the end, which comes from the yisarusa d'lasata. That through the yisarusa d'lasata comes the yisarus from above. You have the yisarus from above that precedes the person's avodah and that follows the person's avodah. Precedes the person's avodah that empowers you. And then there's the one that comes from your avodah, the response after your avodah. There's the one that initiates it, it triggers, and then there's the one that follows. Hi ha'be'er shechafarua karua. This is the well that you dig out, and through that, the living waters come out of the well and ultimately fill even the Yam HaKadmoni. Have a beautiful day and a beautiful week. So remember that this week and next week, I'm going to be away, so Be'ez Hashem will resume the week after. Okay? Please tell anybody that you know who comes. Sach Hatzlacha, a gesunte Zummer, and Psuris Toivis Tamid Kol Hayamim. Yilchazer, Reb Moshe Yilchazer. Isarusid L'Sata. Isarusid L'Sata. There's also an avoid of shakel in zich. It's not a stira. There's different states, different... You want to know how you develop tools? Yeah. The first step is always awareness. When a person looks at how do I respond to situations in life? If those responses are coming from different places, I'll see it in the responses. For example, if I'm responding with no patience, if I'm responding with no love, if I'm responding with anger, if I'm responding with fear, if I even need to respond, that means that I'm operating on a much more narrow place. You know, if I see that people that I really love are getting hurt by me, and people who love me, I'm getting hurt by them. So these are all. So
you know that you need.
A person has to be aware of all these things, and relationships are very important because they give us feedback. When you have a real relationship, you get feedback, like how are you experiencing this relationship? That feedback allows us to open ourselves up to what's going on. So that's the first step always. The first step is that awareness of something is going on. Now, it doesn't change in a day, but that awareness is the beginning of a process where the person could now start asking, what is it? What is it? And that's what it really means to clean up the earth. Clean up the earth means, what are these blockages? Now, I may not be able to always do it myself. Sometimes if it's very, very intense blockages, I need a mechaykik. I need somebody to help me in, open up the keli. But opening up the keli is really, can you create space for a relationship? Not so easy. Sometimes my keli is blocked, I can't let anybody in. It's filled up with earth. I'm not letting anybody in. Knesset Yisrael is the space where all the neshamas are one. So it's in every person. That nekuda in the Jew, where all the neshamas are mechunas are connected, and they're mekabel from the source, that's called Knesset Yisrael.
This class is brought to you by theyeshiva.net. Please help us continue the classes. Make even a small contribution at www.theyeshiva.net/donate.